Welcome to a Dynamo Spotlight on Cowboy Clean Fuels. Today, Kristin Barbato, co-founder and president of Dynamo Energy Hub, interviews Ryan Waddington, co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Cowboy Clean Fuels. Cowboy Clean Fuels is an innovative and forward-thinking renewable natural gas company based out of Denver, Colorado.
Love this countdown. Doesn't it make it look official?
It's like old-time TV.
I know, right? So Ryan, it's so good to see you. Really, we're so excited to talk with you.
Nice to see you.
I'm actually in Austin, the city where we met. I think it was a couple of years ago at the Pickering Team Fest.
That's right.
When they had their concert. Yeah. So I was asking you about who is Cowboy Clean Fuel?
We're a climate tech and energy transition company. We're based in Denver. We have a field office up in Gillette, Wyoming. And we co-founded the company in 2020. We licensed we're commercializing some patents that were licensed from the University of Wyoming, hence the Cowboy name. And my co-founder is a professor there. He's been working on this technology for 15 plus years. And so he's the author of the patents that we're commercializing. And fundamentally what we do is we produce renewable natural gas and also permanently sequester carbon dioxide that's been removed from the atmosphere kind of at the same time. So we utilize readily available renewable biomass feedstocks. We utilize or use unutilized energy production infrastructure and assets, which there's a lot up in this part of Wyoming that we operate. And ultimately, we leverage a number of natural processes that are kind of embedded in the atmosphere to biosphere to geosphere carbon cycle, and kind of bring all that to life again to produce RNG at the same time we sequester CO2.
Yeah. So University of Wyoming, I thought for sure you were going to mention University of Michigan behind you there.
Yeah, you noticed my pocket. We're having a tough go of it right now, but hopefully we'll come through in the end. Yeah, I thought
you always do.
Being in Texas, some people will say, "Oh, Cowboys," but it's the Wyoming Cowboys are
the Wyoming
Cowboys that we're referring to. So.
As we go too far afield from our conversation here, I will tell you, I went to my first Longhorns game recently. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Anyway, so speaking of Michigan plays Texas next year, so maybe next year this time.
That's right, because they're changing conferences, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Anyway, enough about college football. We'll talk about that on another time. But when it comes to the carbon sequestration, and then into renewables, this is really what people are terming green molecules now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important because, there's a lot of, everybody's trying to decarbonize, right? We're trying to address climate change. And there's a limit to what you can decarbonize with the solutions that we have, at hand that are scalable today. So think wind and solar, maybe to some extent, batteries and electric vehicles. But that only takes you so far. There are, industrial processes and applications that can't be decarbonized with those forms of electricity. We need actual molecules. We need methane for myriad, uses. And so the question is, how do we decarbonize, those things? I think we have to find ways to continue to use, methane molecules. Obviously, what we do, we're trying to fill that void, right? We're producing renewable methane, and in our case, it's actually carbon negative renewable methane. So we think that this is going to increasingly be an important part of the whole decarbonization, path that we're all on.
Yeah. So this is, I think, effectively, it sounds like this is what this is the role you're establishing within the energy transition. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what that role is and how it makes you unique. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's that and more. It's really what makes us unique is a number of things, but they're all kind of tied up to this, this process I described. So the first is, that we are producing RNG at the same time, that we can sequester CO2. On the RNG side, what makes us really unique is our scale and our cost. So RNG is a market today, and it's dominated by anaerobic digesters, these big steel vessels that are built on the surface and connected to dairy farms. The challenge with those There's a number of them, but the big challenge with those is they're relatively small scale and they're relatively expensive. They're significant CapEx associated with those. And we are kind of the opposite, right? So we can produce at very large scale and we have very low CapEx. And the reason we can do that is because, where they have to build these big steel vessels to put the feedstock in to run the process and let the microorganisms that produce the methane do their thing, we utilize basically a massive geologic formation. In our case, it's a coal seam that's about 1,000 feet below the ground that does the same thing. So it's the host site, it's the media for these microorganisms. The same ones, by the way, that are in the digesters at the dairy farms happen to naturally exist in these coal seams, below the ground. And so, all we need to do is provide the feedstock. So we inject the feedstock into the subsurface, make it available to the bugs that are there in these massive, we call them geobioreactors, where the host the bugs and they do their thing. So we don't need to build that. It already exists. Nature did it for us, right? So we have the scale that starts to get close to the traditional energy, industry, upstream gas infrastructure kind of scale. But the CapEx, that is orders of magnitude lower than traditional digester technology. So that's the first big thing that's different. The second thing,
it sounds like the first one is, to boil it down, you don't have to build the big plant.
Right. It's a huge advantage, right? And then when you think about the challenge we have, for both energy transition and decarbonization, it's scale, right? The challenge we have is that the industry is so big and the challenge is so big. We need scalable solutions. And look, we cheer on every digester project that gets built, but when you add up the molecules and the impact, it's every one of them is pretty small. And so we think we can have a bigger impact because of the scale that exists there in the powder. Just as a quick data point, so our first project will produce about 0.7 BCF of RNG per year. It's on about wells that are on about a 12,000 acre footprint. The Powder River Basin as a whole, something like 15 million acres. So you're talking about orders of magnitude more size. And when you compare that to a typical digester output in terms of RNG, we're already orders of magnitude bigger. So we have the potential to be much bigger and make a real difference in RNG. The other thing that's really unique, again, goes back to this co-benefit, this on the carbon side. So with we sequester CO2 at the same time we produce the RNG. So if you go back a little bit to not to get too sciencey, but the way that process works, the bacteria, they break down the organic matter and they make CO2 and methane as
a byproduct, correct?
Yeah, at roughly the same rate. It's just when you kind of do the stoichiometry of the reaction, that's what you get. And it doesn't matter whether
I remember that word. I just had a flashback. Sorry, yeah, that one hurt. So, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Balancing equations, right? So, and it doesn't matter whether it's these bugs in a digester above the ground, whether it's in a landfill, whether it's in a cow's stomach, or whether it's in our coal seam 1,000 feet below the ground. That they do what they do. They make CO2. But whereas, on the surface, whether you're at a landfill or a digester, you have to scrub out that CO2 and you have to concentrate the gas if you want to move that gas into a pipeline to, an end use for natural gas or for methane. In our case, we don't have to do that because the coal seam, in addition to hosting the bacteria and the archaea, it also scrubs out the CO2. It's again, natural process. We didn't have to pay for it. We didn't have to engineer it. It just naturally happens at the pressures that exist in that subsurface coal seam. The CO2 can't escape. It gets adsorbed. Think of it as like Velcro. It gets Velcroed on the coal. And so when we produce, when we pump the wells, right, that are offset to where we're injecting, the only thing that comes up is methane. We get about 97 or 98% methane. And so we're pipeline quality, ready to go right away. So that reduces our operating costs. So we've already got lower CapEx, right? Now we've got lower operating costs from that standpoint, a huge advantage. But the other thing, if you go back to the revenue line, because the source of our carbon, not only that's in the RNG, but that's also in the CO2 that gets sequestered, was originally atmospheric CO2. So if you think about our feedstock is a byproduct of sugar beets. And sugar beets, like any plant, grows through photosynthesis, which pulls CO2 out of the air. So that carbon that gets sequestered away is actually carbon removal. And one of the things you're seeing in the carbon markets today, excuse me, is really high prices, really nice premiums being paid for carbon removal credits versus just traditional offset credits that might come from a wind farm or a forestry project. And so that's what really makes us unique. The scalability, the low CapEx, and the co-benefits on the carbon side, not only that reduce our OpEx, but create a new revenue opportunity for us in the form of carbon removal credits.
Wow. This is great. So if I go, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, see if I understand. When
Sure.
you're already through this natural process, removing the CO2 and storing it.
Yep.
Which is enabling you to lower your OpEx because you're going to have to do that anyway, but it's also creating a revenue stream in terms of
exactly
credits.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really an amazing set of things that, and mostly, I mean, obviously there's a lot of know-how here. There's patents that protect it, but a lot of this is the natural systems that we're just taking advantage of. We don't even really have to engineer them much. And you see a lot of that in the carbon world today, people looking to leverage existing kind of natural processes, whether it's with some of the ocean-based stuff or whatever. We're doing the same, right, with geologic formations and microbial communities that exist. And I think that's, that there's a lot of potential there. And it's kind of the thing we should be doing, really. It's just trying to find scalable natural solutions to these really big problems.
So I'm going to throw a term at you. You tell me if this is right. I've heard a term, biomimicry. Could you?
Yeah.
Is it kind of in that genre almost?
It is. So it's a interesting term and very important one. And it comes into play in a lot of sustainability type applications. In our case, I think it's even one step closer than that. We don't even need to replicate the natural process. We just use it, right? So biomimicry in our case might be if you built a surface level reactor and then pulled coal from underneath the earth and tried to replicate the geobioreactor on the surface. That would be almost the biomimicry approach. In fact, we don't even need to do that. We just use it as it sits. We just do we leverage it exactly where it is. And so it's even one notch easier, one notch more, simpler.
Yeah, not less complicated. So I would ask again, in terms of the landscape of the energy transition, what do you see that are macro trends that are impacting Cowboy Clean Fuels?
Yeah, and here's where we're, timing is everything in business in a lot of ways, and the timing for what we're doing just couldn't be better. So we see a lot of tailwinds right now, both in RNG and in carbon. So in particular in RNG, this market's been around for a while, but it's been dominated by a couple compliance markets. So the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, the EPA's Renewable Fuel Standard, which are transportation markets. So RNG has been participating in both, but kind of limited to the natural gas usage in transportation as the level of impact. And as we all know, natural gas, that's a small use of natural gas. When you think about the global supply and global demand. And so, but what we're seeing that's really helping now is we're starting to see voluntary markets emerge for RNG. And that's going to open up a whole nother level of opportunity and really a whole nother level of impact. Again, going back to what I said earlier, the applications, that are starting to get fed through these voluntary markets are the hard to decarbonize industrial processes where you need the methane molecules, you need those green molecules, as you mentioned, and that's just a fantastic realization, not only for the climate in our plans to decarbonize, but for what we're doing at Cowboy, because that's where we really want to go. That's the scale that we want to be operating at, and so we're seeing demand for those green molecules come to us, as a scale producer. So that's the first thing. And the other side is really on the carbon, as I mentioned before, this carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, credit market really emerged just in the past 6 months. If we would have talked at the beginning of the year, or any of the times we talked before that, you probably didn't hear this part of our story emphasized as much, because the carbon removal market wasn't really there. The carbon markets that were transacting were, again, these forestry offsets and renewable energy offsets, which are important, but they're not really durable and they don't have as big of an impact as what we're doing. But other folks, like direct air capture and some other technologies that are in this carbon removal space have made a lot of progress into kind of opening up the market, creating the awareness that we can't just turn off, coal plants, or we just can't stop, burning down the rainforest. We actually need to take CO2 that's already in the atmosphere out. We already have concentrations that are too high. So it's not just about lowering the rate of new emissions. We have to take CO2 out, and that's what we're doing. And increasingly, market participants are desiring those kind of credits. Microsoft is the biggest buyer, in the world for CDR credits, and they've been doing transactions of late that are there was one recently was $200 million in value. So we're starting to see this kind of come from nothing 6 to 9 months ago to hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions. And so that's a trend that really bodes well for us, again, as a scaled producer in this market.
That's great. That's basically making a market where there hadn't been a solution before, so that finding the value there is then generating this new type of transaction for a market that now exists because of the technology.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So if I could ask you, sounds like you're working on a lot of things. What are some of the biggest things you're working on right now? There's some big deals, there's some big projects. Like, what kinds of things you want to talk about that are like the big things you're looking forward to in 2024 and beyond? It's
a really exciting time for us at Cowboy. We're just on the cusp of commercialization. We've been at this for just about 4 years now, and we're finally getting ready to commercialize. So as I mentioned, we have this project in the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. It's about 30 miles southwest of Gillette. We just recently, literally in the last couple of weeks, received our underground injection control permit from the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. That's basically a permit that allows us to inject our feedstock into the ground. Yeah, and that's really what triggers everything that we're doing, because as soon as we inject, we've essentially created a carbon credit, and then we start the clock on the bugs producing the RNG. And by the way, they do it very quickly, 45 to 60 days.
What is the window? Say again, I'm sorry.
About 45 to 60 days from the time we inject until when RNG starts to come. So we don't have to wait. But that's what's really exciting us right now is we're just waiting for some pumps to show up and some mixers, and then we're going to be injecting and starting to have commercial operations. So we're right on the cusp of that. So it's really, really exciting times for us. And we're starting, therefore, working on offtake, finding buyers for both the RNG and the carbon credits. So if anybody watching this is interested, feel free to reach out. We're just starting to have conversations, and there's a lot of opportunity there to get on the ground floor. So that's what's going on right now, where everybody's really excited about pushing these things forward.
That is super exciting. Quick question about your feedstock. You said, where's it coming from, and how are you making sure that you have enough for your scalable operation?
Exactly. It's a great question, and one that very often, gets asked, and certainly investors want to know this. And,
sure.
and bio to anything projects historically, the Achilles heel has been the feedstock supply. So we're certainly aware of all that. So what we use initially, by the way, there's a lot of things we can use. A lot of different feedstocks, organic feedstocks have been tested, by our CTO, in the lab. But we settle on initially our byproducts of sugar beet refining. So so we get in the U.S. we get about half of our sweeteners that go into sodas and everything else from sugar, and about half of that, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 60%. Comes from sugar beets. The rest is sugar cane. Globally, it's mostly sugar cane when you think about India and Brazil. But in the U.S., a good portion of our sugar comes from sugar beets. And those beets tend to grow really well in the northern climes. So all around us, from Idaho to Montana, in Wyoming, as well as Colorado, Nebraska, and North Dakota, sugar beets are grown. And as you process sugar beets from the raw beet into white crystal sugar, there's a number of byproducts that come off, and the one that's most important to us right now is molasses, and it's just what you think. It's that brown, syrupy, semi-sweet stuff that you make ginger snaps with. In our case, the molasses that comes from sugar beets generally is not consumed by humans. The molasses you probably have probably comes from sugar cane, but it does have a use that cows, beef cattle, consume a little bit of it as a kind of a semi-sweet, calorie filler in the winter months when they don't graze in the northern part of the country. So we take that only, it's a small part of their diet, so we're not impacting anybody's steak dinner or burgers or anything like that. We'll take some of that away, and we utilize it for what we do. So because the sugar industry in the U.S. is so highly regulated, it's it's stable. It's very consistent year over year. The same amount of molasses is produced year over year. Prices have fluctuated a little bit because all commodities have been a little bit up and down, mostly up the last few years, but they're on their way down. But it's a really good feedstock for us because it's locally available. It's available in large quantities. There's already a distribution infrastructure in place. We can move it via truck or rail, and because it's consistent and reliable, over time. As we go forward, years down the road, we will be, kind of evolving to additional, new feedstocks. We're working on cellulosic-based feedstocks and other things. But right now, this is the low-hanging fruit. It's readily available, and it's working really well for us.
That's great. Of course, when you say beets as your feedstock, you know what I'm thinking of, right? Like I'm thinking of Dwight from The Office actually had a viable product that I thought was a joke for years, but now it turns out it's going to be the feedstock for the new way to get green molecules. Yeah. So who knew? Who knew? He was ahead of his time, I guess. Who knew?
It is. It's an interesting market for sure, but it's an important one for farmers in the northern part of the country where the ground isn't as good for soybean or corns. There's history, going back over 100 years in Idaho and Montana and North Dakota and growing sugar beets, and so it's an important crop for that community and in our region, and so we feel like we're actually going to help create a sustainable path forward, regardless of what might happen, in a kind of a macro, environment for sugar or for sweeteners. We're creating a kind of a sustainable demand for those beets or for part of those beets for a long period of time for generational farmers in that part of the country, and it's something we're proud of.
That's really cool. Really cool. Well, last question before I let you go and enjoy a nice weekend is, we're so glad that you're part of Dynamo. Want to know, what is it that you love about Dynamo, and how has Dynamo helped you in terms of your growth for Cowboy?
Absolutely. Well, so when we set the company, we were kind of new to a number of things. We were new to, I was new to Denver. The people I hired were kind of new to clean energy and energy transition. We were clearly new as a company. No one knew us. And so, being part of Dynamo was a great opportunity for us to kind of, get better networked with the clean energy transition community in particular, in Denver. But also given, Dynamo's, strategy and operations, with offices or locations all around the country, creates an opportunity for us to stay connected, not just locally, but even globally, with innovators and change makers that are important to what we're doing. So it's that networking, that community, is really valuable for us. And clearly, not just events, which have been fantastic, but content, and then opportunities for outreach, like this is great for a company like Cowboy. So we've been really happy with our membership, and we intend to be part of Dynamo for a long time to come.
Oh, love to hear it. Thank you. And we are actually in Denver and Boulder, not in Wyoming yet, but come on down to Texas sometime soon, and we'll have a couple of ranch waters.
Absolutely. It's starting to get cold up here in the north, so we'll come down pretty soon.
Sounds great. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. We're very excited to see what it is you're doing and some of the progress that you've made, especially with some of these new markets. So anyway, wish you the best. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
This has been a Dynamo Spotlight on Cowboy Clean Fuels. You can find more of Dynamo's work on our website, dynamoenergyhub.com, as well as LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course, YouTube. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.